In the area of the town of Botashani, our regiment was stationed in the forest west of the village of Sendrini. The soldiers were engaged in combat training on a specially equipped training field. The summer of the 4th year of the war promised to be very hot and dry. On the front roads, ridden by the wheels of cars and military wagons, ploughed by the tracks of tanks and armoured personnel carriers, the dust, sometimes rising up the column, covered the sky with a grey veil, and then the sun peeped through it faintly, as in a fog. In the fields overgrown with weeds and rarely sown, the gusty wind whipped the unripe ears. The famous Moldovan orchards and vineyards looked unsightly, covered with thick dust, as if with ashes after a great fire. Fruit trees, looking like grey-haired elders, bent down and bent over, lined up in uneven rows behind gnarled fences and dilapidated hedges. I remember well how the commander of the division, Guards Major General Antsiferov, came to our regiment. He conducted with the 2nd Rifle Battalion a demonstration tactical exercise with live firing on the theme, the attack of a reinforced rifle battalion of the 1st Echelon on the long-term, heavily fortified defensive strip of the enemy. I had to worry a lot, but everything went well. Guards but not pumped up and did not fail their commander. After the end of the exercise, the general announced the personnel of the battalion of gratitude for conscientious attitude to training. And a week later I received a call from the division headquarters and warned that the regiment will come to the commander of the 32nd Guards Rifle Corps, hero of the Soviet Union, Guards Lieutenant General Alexander Rodimtsev. I have never met this illustrious military commander, who in 1937 received the Gold Star and the Order of Lenin for the bravery and courage he showed in Spain, where he was a volunteer advisor. But I, like many others, was well aware of the outstanding role played in the Battle of Stalingrad by the famous 13th Guards Rifle Division, which was then commanded by General Rodimtsev. The legendary commander was always for us an example of military valor and excellent commanding skills. In my imagination, he seemed to me a man of mighty physique, authoritative, strict, demanding. But I met a man of medium height with a simple and very good-natured face near the CP of our regiment. He listened to my report, then warmly, fatherly greeted me and other officers of the regiment. 34 years later, I read the memoirs of our commander, Army General A.S. Shadov, and was surprised at the precise characterization he gave General Rodimtsev in character. Alexander Ilyich was somewhat soft, cautious, never made hasty decisions, and announced them only after a comprehensive analysis of the situation and discuss it down to the smallest detail with his Chief of Staff, with the chiefs of the branches and services. The adopted decision was always implemented with persistence. General Rodimtsev was so highly appreciated and respected not only by the commander of the 5th Guards Army. Alexander Ilyich enjoyed great authority and love in the corps, and in divisions, and in regiments. On June 2nd, a combat order was received from the division headquarters to move the regiment to the front line. In all units at 3 p.m., combat training classes were stopped. Exactly 2 hours later, the regiment lined up in a marching column and moved in the direction of Dumbrova Rota, Kodary, Fokriali. Here, near the town of Lungu, we were to take the defence in the 2nd echelon of the division. Together with the commanders of battalions, companies, batteries and staff officers, I went to reconnaissance of the terrain. Knowing that the regimental defence area was in range of enemy artillery and mortar fire, I took precautions. But unfortunately they were not enough. The commander of the 8th Rifle Company, Guards Lieutenant Podkopayev, was wounded in the leg by a mine fragment. I decided to place the regiment's CP in a grove, half a kilometre south of the village of Fokriali. On June 7th, engineering work to improve the occupied positions was stopped due to the fact that the regiment occupied a new area of defence already in the 1st echelon, replacing the units of the 512th Independent Machine Gun Battalion. The 2nd and 3rd Battalions, which made up the 1st echelon, positioned themselves in prepared trenches and trenches north of Yerbiki, Bamechi. An observation of the enemy and a study of his fire system was organised. The Germans now and then conducted rifle and machine gun fire on our front line, occasionally undertook artillery and mortar fire on the positions of the 2nd echelon and PAG firing positions. On the northern outskirts of the village of Yerbichi, in a grove which in its configuration resembled a boot, and therefore was so named by the fighters, our observers found an enemy tank. We also noticed a large movement of enemy vehicles on the highway in the area of Podjul, Iolai in the direction of Iasi and back. Individual vehicles often entered the road to Yerbakovici and returned back. The nature of the cargoes could not be ascertained due to the thick dust. There were more and more cases of Romanian soldiers coming over to our side. I do not remember who was the first to inform me that the Allied peaks landed on June 6th in northern France. But frankly speaking, this news did not excite me. And not only me. After all, there had been talk of a second front almost from the very beginning of the war, back in the difficult year of 1941. And only almost 3 years later, the troops of the United States and England appeared in Europe. In conversation with soldiers, sergeants, officers on this occasion could hear these words. At last the Allies are swinging. They are afraid of spilling unnecessary blood. Now we can cope with the fascists without them. They want to eat the victory pie with us, but where were they before? Of course the soldiers and commanders were right, expressing such an opinion, and I remembered these words when we met with American soldiers in Dresden at the beginning of May 1945. But about it later. The cheerful mood of soldiers in the conditions of front life has always played a very important role. Therefore, commanders, political workers used every opportunity to strengthen the morale of soldiers, sergeants and officers. On June 9th, we received an order from the division headquarters to allocate from each battalion one best company commander, from the artillery the best battery commander, from each company 3 best soldiers from the sergeant and enlisted personnel for the celebration of the awarding of the Guards banner to our 32nd Rifle Corps. Commanders and political workers held in this connection in all units of the regiment conversations about the traditions of the Soviet Guard. To the joy of fellow soldiers, on the same day a command was given to freelance regimental photographers to take pictures of the best soldiers in each company, platoon, department. It was allowed to take group photos as a souvenir. The finished photos were then handed out, and the soldiers sent them home along with letters to their relatives and friends. After many days of observation of the front line of the enemy's defense, studying its firing system, I decided to send out scouts to capture a control prisoner. On June 16th, in the 2nd Rifle Battalion, was allocated a reconnaissance group of 20 men under the command of Guards Senior Lieutenant Komarov. The search area was planned the northwest slope of height, 139.0, northeast of Yerbici. When dusk thickened, the scouts of the capture group moved to the initial position. The support group, with 4 machine guns at its disposal, took up firing positions. The capture group, led by Guards Petty Officer Verikin, consisted of Guards Staff Sergeant Akhmetiev, Guards Sergeant Verevkin, Guards Private Bryukovetsky, Petrunin, Shevchenko Komev, Kulik, Lukashenko. With the onset of complete darkness, the scouts, being careful, crawled forward to the enemy trenches. At the same time, artillery bombardment of enemy positions began, accompanied by the fire of machine guns of the supporting group. Hitlerites were forced to hide in the trenches, and the soldiers of the capture group took advantage of it. They threw grenades at the trenches and broke into them. A hand-to-hand fight ensued. In a short fight, 10 enemy soldiers were killed. Some managed to escape, 5 raised their hands. In this battle was killed Senior Sergeant Akhmetiev, were wounded Privates Petrunin, Kulik, Bryukovetsky. Having taken prisoners, carrying away the killed comrade and helping to move the wounded, the group of scouts returned back. Only now the enemy opened machine gun fire on our scouts, but the fighters were already near their trenches. When the scouts got to their own, they learned that in the ensuing firefight, Guards Senior Lieutenant Komarov, who was directing the fire of the supporting group, was also wounded. In this group, Guards Sergeant Togilanov's squad especially distinguished itself. Instead of 1 control prisoner, 5 were delivered to the regimental headquarters, one of whom turned out to be an Oberleutnant. All of them were immediately sent to the division headquarters. A week later, another reconnaissance group under the command of Guards Lieutenant Vlasov was sent to the enemy location. The group included Guards Petty Officers Glebov, Morozov, Guards Sergeant Shugunov, Privates Cherba, Karulin, Lobov, Tarakin, Klimenko, Maloshevich, Shabanov, Tonasichuk, Zhobin, Svetlitsky, a total of 14 guardsmen. They captured 3 tongues a corporal, a sergeant and a soldier. They also got one captured machine gun. At the end of June 1944, the 5th Guards Army was transferred from the 2nd Ukrainian Front to the 1st Ukrainian Front. This became known when a combat order was received from the division headquarters to prepare for the transfer of the defence area occupied by the regiment. On June 26 at 3:00, the regiment was built into a marching column. In a few days we made a difficult march and arrived at the new place of deployment near the village of Mostiatsy. During these days the soldiers were happy to learn that the strategic offensive operation of several fronts to liberate Belarus had been successfully launched. On June 26 Moscow saluted the Soviet troops who liberated Vitebsk, and on June 29 a salute was sounded in honour of the liberation of Bobruisk. On this occasion political informations were held in the units. On July 3 I received a packet from the division headquarters with a combat order to prepare to move to the place of new deployment, where all units of the regiment this time would be delivered by railroad. In a short period of time to the railroad station Feleshti were brought planks for the equipment of 20 wagons, fully prepared fodder, firewood for camp kitchens, and much more. Our staffers worked tirelessly, drawing up the necessary documentation for the organisation of loading and the echelons. On the next day it became known about the liberation of the capital of Belarus, Minsk, where the occupants had dominated for 3 years. The order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, dedicated to this remarkable event, received by radio, caused great enthusiasm among everyone. At the meetings held in the units, it was said that the Red Army was advancing on almost all fronts, that Hitler's invaders could not withstand its mighty blows. "And we would rather go into battle," exclaimed the soldiers. "Let's give the heat to Hitler." On July 4 the regiment made a march from Mostiatsy to the station Feleshti. From here the units in 2 echelons followed the railroad through the junction stations of Balti, Rybnitsa, Vapnyaka, Zhymarinka, Proskorov to Volochisk. From here, on July 12, after a short rest, we left in 2 columns in the direction of the town of Skalat, located southwest of Ternopil, and late in the evening the columns joined at the crossroads of highways 1 kilometre northeast of this city. Further on the regiment headed along the route Skalat, Kishvo, Poznanka, Dnila, Josifoka to Mikhailovka. This small place was surrounded by forest on almost all sides. The regiment camped on its northwestern edge, and on July 14 all units began combat training. 2 days later was scheduled review of the combat readiness of the regiment, which was conducted with the participation of Staff Officers Division Commander Major General I. Ant Syfarov. After dinner here on the forest edge, the division amateur art ensemble performed the soldiers. With a good mood, the soldiers left after the concert. I don't know why, but that evening I especially felt a sense of deepest respect for all these people who had already seen and experienced so much, my fellow soldiers, my combat comrades. July 19th, in the location of the camp of our regiment, held a general building of the division on the occasion of awarding it the Order of Suvorov I degree. Let me remind you that the division was awarded this order in January 1944 for participation in the Kirovograd operation. The commander of the 32nd Guards Corps, Guards Lieutenant General A.I. Rodimtsev, came to us again. Ode addressed the soldiers with a short congratulatory speech, and on behalf of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, attached the Order of Suvorov to the Battle Guards banner of the division. In his response speech, Major General Ant Syfarov of the Guards said, "Blessed with the Suvorov star, we swear to beat the enemy with renewed vigour. We swear to destroy him in his own den." Then past the improvised tribune the most distinguished guardsmen of the past battles marched by platoon. Among them were the best soldiers of our regiment. It was at this time, in the second half of July 1944, the troops of the 1st Ukrainian Front, the second echelon of which was the 5th Guards Army, from the area of Ternopil, went on a decisive offensive, and, having defeated a large group of the enemy in the area of Brody, at the end of July liberated the city of Lvov. Developing the offensive, they forced the San River, and the fighting began to unfold in Poland. We already knew that on July 21st, the Polish Committee for National Liberation, the temporary executive body of power in the country, was formed in Chelm. Its creation expressed the victory of the People's Democratic Revolution in Poland, The newspapers published the PCNL Manifesto, which contained a program of fundamental political and socio-economic reforms in the country being liberated from fascist oppression. And at the end of July, the deputy regimental commander was summoned to a meeting in the political department of the division in connection with the withdrawal of Soviet troops into Poland. There Ivan Efimovich Poltorak was familiarized with the appeal of the Military Council of the First Ukrainian Front to the Polish people. The text of this address he brought with him, and we, with the deputy police officer, the secretary of the party bureau, regimental agitator, and Comsorg outlined topics for conversations in units about the liberating mission of the Red Army, about the international duty of the Soviet soldier, about the long-standing friendship of the Russian and Polish peoples, about their joint participation in the common struggle against the Nazi invaders. Our 5th Guards at this time was on the march, and its regiments, including ours, began to advance in the direction of Baranov, Padu, Melek. In this area all the way to the Vistula River is sandy soil. There are a lot of forest lands, and in them there are a lot of ripe blueberries. To see the tops of tall pine trees, one had to tilt one's head, holding one's cap. Dark wooden village houses were mostly pressed against the forest. Close to them were narrow strips of fields, on each of which already harvested rye stood in low bunches. Along each field there were shallow ditches for water drainage. Tidiness and order reigned in the cramped farmyards. Poles, in white shirts and black vests, took off their wide-brimmed hats and smiled welcomingly. Dobrzy dizen, panov towarzyszy. Dziękujemy bardzo, zi przysłali. The inhabitants brought out buckets with cool well water, treated our soldiers with apples and pears. Regiments' subdivisions passed one village after another by forced march. The front was humming closer and closer to the front line, and the front-line soldiers were sure of it. It really was a short walk away. The hard 10-day campaign, which took a lot of strength, was over. In the early morning of August 4th, we arrived in the area of Napa and took up the defence in the area of Tynes, Ruzino. By this time, the situation here was very tense. At the end of July 1944, during the Lvov-Sandomir operation, the advanced units of the 1st Ukrainian Front reached the Vistula River and crossed it, capturing a small bridgehead on the left bank near Sandomir. By the end of August 1st, the bridgehead was extended to 30 kilometers along the front and 20 in depth. The enemy did not want to put up with it, and on August 2nd attacked our troops from the north and from the south, along the right bank of the Vistula River in the direction of Baranov, where was our main crossing point across the river. He wanted to cut us off from the main forces at any cost and destroy our troops on the bridgehead. During 3 days there were intense battles to repel enemy strikes on August 4th, and was introduced into the battle of our 5th Guards Army, so we again found ourselves in the heat of battle. On the same day, in the afternoon, before we had time to properly entrench, battalions of the 1st Echelon boldly attacked the enemy and threw him back behind the line of the railroad. The enemy took positions at the boundary of Padev, Pitbally and strong rifle, machine gun and mortar fire, supported by 6 tanks, and 4 armoured personnel carriers delayed the further advance of our soldiers. We had to entrench on the occupied line. The Germans, with the support of tanks, fiercely counterattacked, and after one of the counterattacks, the rifle company of Guards, Senior Lieutenant Baranov from the 3rd Battalion, was for some time cut off from their own. Having learned about it, I ordered the commander of the anti-tank battery, Guards Captain Radchenko, to urgently come to the aid of his battle comrades. Having turned the guns on the move, the artillerymen began to hit the enemy tanks with direct fire. Enveloped in flames, 2 cars became as halted. Several others fell back. Guards Senior Lieutenant Baranov raised his men in the attack, who managed to hold out until the approach of anti-tankers, and after a fierce battle by the morning of August 5th, the railway station Padev was liberated from the enemy. Company Commander Guards Senior Lieutenant Baranov, on the eve of the battle, was accepted as a candidate for the All-Union Communist Party, was awarded the Order of Patriotic War II degree. The regiment took a new line at the intersection of dirt and railroad near the station. The reconnaissance sent forward reported that there was no enemy in the nearest settlements, Kenblov, Tarnuvek. All our units moved further in the western direction, approaching the Vistula, and in the afternoon came to the right bank of the river. Its width reached here 250 and depth more than 3 meters. At 17:00, the regiment began forcing the river in the following order. First went the 3rd Battalion, a company of APC and a battery of 45 guns. Second, the 2nd Battalion and a battery of 76 guns. Third, the 1st Battalion. The rest of the units crossed to the left bank of the Vistula following them. Watching from my temporary command post over the course of the crossing, I noted with satisfaction with what diligence and perseverance the soldiers overcame the water obstacle, showing ingenuity. For crossing they used everything that was at hand, and was able to hold on to the water fishing boats, old barges, empty barrels, logs, planks, hedge poles, and so on. Many fighters threw themselves into the swim on straw-stuffed raincoats. About 2 hours later, under the guidance of the head of the engineering service of the regiment, Guards Captain M. Kachaturov, our sappers built a ferry from 2 barges found on the sandy shore, which were abandoned by the Germans who did not have time to use them. Despite the strong current, the sappers of Lieutenant Comyn's platoon skillfully led the ferry not by cable, but by oars. Officer Ushakov's platoon simultaneously organized a boat crossing. Guards Senior Sergeant Turigin managed to accommodate 20 men in the boat, and even with 4 mortars, the ferry, working continuously, made 16 trips back and forth in a day. The boat turned around 29 times. At dawn on August 7th, the regiment took up the defence on the left bank of the Vistula, on the section Zalezje-Ziborsk. Here were also concentrated 22nd Motor Brigade, 108th Mortar Regiment, 95 tanks. The enemy, according to our intelligence, had a strong pre-bridge fortification northwest of the bridge across the Vistula, which was in his hands. Hitlerites, guessing apparently that our troops are accumulating in front of their positions, hastily began to transfer reinforcements. During the night there went about 50 tanks and up to a regiment of enemy infantry. During the next day, the enemy methodically conducted artillery fire on the regiment's fighting orders, bombed us and fascist aviation. But despite this, by the end of the day, all units buried in the ground. Full-profile trenches were occupied by riflemen, machine gunners. Positions for mortarmen and artillerymen were equipped. In the area of the regiment's CP concentrated companies of communications, machine gunners, anti-tank guns. It was obvious that we would not have to stay long in this place, but we could not move further, and here's why the ferry crossing the Vistula was so loaded that on the right bank there were still up to 15 tons of regimental ammunition, clothing and food stores, about 50 wagons of rear units, 5 trucks. I ordered the regimental engineer, Guards Captain Kachaturov, to organize the transfer of cargoes, vehicles and wagons to the left bank in the shortest possible time. I allocated to him to assist the assistant to the Chief of Staff of the regiment on the rear. Guards Captain Gorodko with a sapper platoon and a group of masters of ammunition, commanded by Guards Lieutenant Bajinov. The sappers built a large-sized folding boat, and by the end of the day transferred all ammunition, spare weapons and food to the left bank. A little later the rest of the cargoes were transferred there as well. On August 8th in the evening it became known that the Nazis were accumulating forces, preparing for an attack on Patsano. This was told by a defector soldier, a Pole by nationality, brought to the regimental headquarters. I, of course, reported it to the commander. This information was double-checked by the division headquarters and confirmed. August 9th, I received an order to form 2 independent groups. They were to move along the routes Patsano, Olaspika, Buddy and Zalezje, Ziborsk, Gais, Slupek. On August 10th, the first group, which included the 1st and 2nd Rifle Battalions and artillery of the regiment, reached the line Stels, Kempi. The regiment's CP was equipped in Buddy, special units settled there. The second group, the 3rd Rifle Battalion, with attached and supporting firepower, took up the defence on the Garpovsi line in the bend of the Vistula River, with the task of preventing the large enemy forces remaining on the right bank from crossing to the left bank. We understood, of course, that the enemy would not leave us alone and would try to throw the Soviet troops from the Sandomir bridgehead, from where the direct way to the Oder, to Berlin. And so it happened. On August 11th, the enemy struck at the junction of the 112th and 95th Guards Rifle Divisions, threatening to reach the rear of the 32nd Guards Rifle Corps. To prevent such a threat, the commander of the 5th Guards Army, General A.S. Zhadov, who at that time was at the headquarters of the 32nd Corps, gave an order to its commander, General I. Rodimtsev, to urgently put into action our 97th Guards Division and in cooperation with the 52nd Tank Brigade to hit the flank of the advancing group of German troops. The Corps commander immediately ordered General II. Antsefarov to attack the enemy advancing in the direction of Kurdzavenka, Shidlov. I received an order the regiment to withdraw from the occupied positions and move from Brod to Konomlot by forced march. For a more detailed clarification of the combat situation was sent reconnaissance. In the forest near the village of Grozibo, the regimental scouts unexpectedly encountered German reconnaissance. The fight was short and not in favour of the Germans. Enemy spies were forced to retreat, but not all of them. Our fighters captured an Oberleutnant and a soldier of the 79th Infantry Regiment. Information received from these prisoners clarified something. In the afternoon of August 12th, the division commander ordered the regiment to go on the offensive, supported by tanks and the 3rd Division of the 232nd Guards Artillery Regiment. The attack was unexpected for the Hitlerites, and their defence was broken through. By 16:00, the regiment reached the borders on the approaches to the villages of Zaraz and Ponik. Then, however, the offensive slowed down the enemy tanks, dispersed in ambush, opened a strong fire. In addition, all day long several dozen Fokkers, methodically bombed and, descending to shaving flight, fired from cannons and machine guns at the regiment's fighting order and the nearest rear. In the battles of August 12th, the 120 mm mortar battery of Guards Captain M.Y. Lippmann, the mortar company commanded by Guards Senior Lieutenant A.S. Artsab, and the 2nd Battalion of Guards Major A.K. Stablevsky worked perfectly. I maintained constant communication with the 3rd Rifle Battalion, which was still occupying the defence in the Vistula Bend, in the area of Tarnois. Toward evening, taking advantage of the temporary lull, I called there again. The battalion commander, Guards Major V. I. Chaika reported to me that the enemy was not particularly active, but was clearly trying to identify our forces and locate the location of our firing positions. For this purpose, Hitlerites 3 times at dusk sent from the right bank rafts with models of guns and even stuffed animals resembling German soldiers. But the trick of the enemy was unravelled. The battalion did not open fire. I almost didn't sleep for the 3rd day and, having said goodbye to the Commander 3, decided to sleep for an hour. The orderly laid my overcoat on the bench in the dugout, putting my own rolled-up overcoat in the headboard. And I hardly touched my head to this improvised pillow as I plunged into sleep. How many minutes I managed to sleep, I don't know. I woke up because someone was shaking me by the shoulders. I opened my eyes. The Chief of Staff, Guards Major Takmovtsev. "Yuri Andreevich," he said guiltily, "the commander is on the wire. He demands you." I picked up the phone, reported, and heard the familiar bass voice of General Antsefarov. "Were you asleep or what? You sound a little sleepy." "I was, Comrade General. I had a little nap. Reinforcements are coming to you now, Captain Avilkin and his men. They're almost as numerous as Chaika's battalion, so you'll have your regiment in full strength." "Thank you for that, Comrade General. I haven't heard anything about Captain Avilkin." "Well, you'll get to know him. He's a fighting officer. He's been commanding Shura for a while." That's when it became clear to me. I knew, of course, that Shura frontline soldiers abbreviated the penalty company. I also knew that the soldiers, demoted sergeants and officers, who were determined by the court-martial to be penalized, mostly fought desperately, trying to atone for their guilt with blood. Half an hour later at the regiment's CP, an officer dusty from head to toe appeared and reported to me that the penalty company of 147 men had arrived at my disposal. Our regiment was assigned the task to knock out Hitlerites from the village of Oblendiuv, to ride the highway Shidlov-Kurdzavenka, and to reach the approaches to Ponik by the end of August 13th. In the afternoon I decided to attack the Germans suddenly, without artillery preparation, before dawn with the forces of the 1st and 2nd Battalions, covering the village from the flanks, where the enemy's defences were weaker. I reported the plan of the upcoming battle to Captain Avilkin. "Comrade Guards Lieutenant Colonel," he said, "I ask you to entrust my company to storm Oglenduva from the front. And when the Krauts are drawn into the battle, battalions will strike from the flanks. Well, not a bad idea, I agreed. Call to the Control Commander 1 Guards Major Black and Commander 2 Guards Major Steblevsky, and we talked about all the issues of interaction in the attack on Oglenduv. About 3 o'clock Avilkin's company secretly concentrated in a small ravine near the outskirts. Then, without a single shot, silently the penal officers rushed to the attack. A hand-to-hand fight ensued. Hitlerites apparently did not expect such a daring attack and retreated to the depth of the village. And the German tankers did not even have time to start the engines of the tanks standing on the road. They were captured by the men of the company and turned out to be quite serviceable. When 2 green rockets launched by Avilkin soared over Oglenduv, the 1st and 2nd battalions got into action, and by daybreak Oglenduv was in our hands. I got there about 20 minutes after the battle was over. Captain Avilkin reported that the company had lost 20 men killed and 30 wounded, but had captured 4 German tanks, including Royal Tigers. I had seen more than once simple Tigers, but Royal had never seen them before. I examined them and came to the conclusion that the machine was powerful, but it seemed clumsy. I will note, by the way, that these tanks, as I was then told in the division headquarters, were the first of the captured tanks on the First Ukrainian Front. A few days later, 10 serviceable Royal Tigers were sent to Moscow for the exhibition of trophy weapons, opened in the Central Park of Culture and Recreation named after M. Gorky. Among this dozen of trophy combat vehicles were the Royal Tigers captured by Captain Avilkir's company. And to finish with this combat episode, I will say that this unit soon joined our regimental family, and the former penalized soldiers, as having atoned for their guilt before the motherland with blood, became full-fledged soldiers. It was a hot day on August 13th. The thermometer in the sun showed almost 40 degrees. This day was hot and on heat of fights. Hitler's command did not want to come to terms with the loss of Oglenduva and undertook one attack after another. Only until noon had to repel 5 infantry strikes supported by 10 tanks. 2 of them were hit by the gun crews of Guards Sergeant Durakin and Guards Staff Sergeant Levin, and the 3rd tank was put out of action by the Pityerovtsi. Later, the deputy battalion commander, Senior Lieutenant Pavlov, told me and Major Poltorak that the night before, when the mail came, our famous machine gunner Alexander Zhegiria received a letter. It was from his brother Vasily from distant Stalingrad. Well, what does the brother write? Pavlov asked the sergeant. He writes that he recently visited his native village, that my mother has become completely grey, mourning younger brothers Nikolai and Yasha, that she is worried about me. She asked Vasily to write to me to take care of himself. I continued to tell Pavlov how Zhegiria took a piece of paper out of the field bag and, wetting the tip of a chemical pencil with saliva, began to write a letter back to his brother. Already after the war, the young trackers of Voroshilovka village made a copy of this last front letter of Alexander, which among others was carefully kept by his mother Praskovia Ilinichna. It contains lines like these: "We entered heavy fighting. I and my friends guardsmen are fighting not for life, but for death. If I die, remember me and my family, especially Lida and Valik. Please give me affection. Hugs, your brother Alexander, August 13th, 1944. On August 13th, Alexander Zhegiria distinguished himself again, and on the same day he died. As in the evening, the battalion's commander, Guards Senior Lieutenant M.A.N. Varaka, reported to me and the deputy politician, the case, according to him, was as follows. In the middle of the day, the battalion began to advance towards the forest. The infantrymen rose to the attack. Zhegiria, with his Maxima formation, moved forward, took a convenient position, and, having opened and aimed fire, what is called, mowed down the Germans. Finally, they trembled and began to run away. "Look, they are dragging away," shouted the soldiers of the regiment. "They are falling, but not all of them," Alexander calmly said, and showed on dozens of Hitler's soldiers killed by him. At that time, a German tank, standing in ambush in the forest, opened fire on the sergeant's machine gun. After the second shell burst, sent from the tank cannon, the Partok saw how the machine gun was thrown away by the explosion, and Zhachiria fell down on the side, grabbed his right side. Machine gunners Fedorov, Lunev and Sivak rushed to him. They unbuttoned his uniform, lifted his head with their hands. The wounded breathed heavily and intermittently. The ground under him was soaked with blood. The soldiers quickly tore individual bags and began to bandage the sergeant's chest. Varaka ran up. "Be patient, Sasha," he said. "Be patient. Everything." Zhachiria said quietly and panting, whispered hotly, "Beat the bastard. Fascist for our desecrated land, as I beat him." "Aye." These were Alexander's last words. Varaka immediately took out of the clipboard the form of a zipper leaflet and wrote on it, "Guardsmen, friends. The hero gunner, communist Alexander Zhachiria died. Our Sasha is dead. Forward to the enemy. Let's avenge Zhachiria," and sent a leaflet through the trenches. And the first farewell salute to the dead hero was 5 volleys of our guards' mortars, which fell on the heads of the fascists. It was the beginning of the artillery preparation before a new attack. Ahead was the village of Konimluti. After a short but brutal battle, it was liberated from the Nazis. In this Polish village, behind the fence of the church, the funeral of the hero machine gunner Alexander Zhachiria, our glorious battle comrade, took place. On the lid of the coffin, covered with kumak, the warrior's helmet, autumn flowers, asters, a funeral meeting was held. To the burial place the coffin was carried in the arms of the officers of the regiment. Threefold salute, a volley of machine guns and rifles, was the last military honor to the valiant son of our fatherland. On the obelisk in Russian and Polish languages later was embossed the inscription, "Hero of the Soviet Union. Guards Sergeant Alexander Efimovich Zhachiria died a brave death for the liberation of Poland from the German invaders on August 13, 1944. Still do not have time to fade flowers on the grave of the hero. His Maxim machine gun, No. 0184 of 1943, which was received by the regiment in the last days of the Battle of Stalingrad, was repainted, and an inscription was made on the plate that it belonged to the hero of the Soviet Union, A.E. Cheza. At the end of 1944, I received an order to send this machine gun to Moscow. Since then, it became an exhibit of the Central Museum of the Armed Forces of the USSR. The title of Hero of the Soviet Union was awarded to A.E. Zhachiria a month after his death. Then he was forever enrolled in the lists of the 289th Guards Rifle Regiment. Objectively assessing the current combat situation by mid-August, I reported to the division command that the area defended by the regiment reached 6 kilometers along the front, so it is advisable to return from the bend of the Vistula 3rd Rifle Battalion. The commander agreed with this, and by the evening of August 14th, Guards Major Chaika reported to me about the arrival of the battalion. Before dawn on August 15th, as the reconnaissance sent by me showed, the enemy had withdrawn from his positions and he was no longer in Kurdzavenka or Jablanica. However, at times the enemy was firing rifle and machine gun fire from the area of the Sidlo-Korytnica road. On August 19th, in all units of the regiment, the soldiers proudly read the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of August 18th, 1944. The words of the order had a direct relation to us, participants of the battles on the Sandomir bridgehead. The troops of the First Ukrainian Front, having forced the Vistula River near Sandomir, as a result of persistent fighting advanced up to 50 km, expanded the captured bridgehead on the western bank of the Vistula to 120 km along the front, and today, on August 18th, stormed the city of Sandomir, an important stronghold of the German defence on the lazy bank of the Vistula. In the order it was noted that the troops of Generals Zhadov, Rodimtsev, Syfarov, and many others distinguished themselves in the battles of forcing the Vistula and for the capture of the Sandomir bridgehead. In commemoration of the victory, one stated further, in the order compounds and units, that the most distinguished in the battles during the forcing of the Vistula and for the possession of the Sandomir bridgehead, to submit to the naming of Sandomirsky, Vistula, and to be awarded orders. Our regiment was also presented to the name of Vistula Regiment. On the same day, another joyful news was received with great enthusiasm. The troops of the 3rd Belarusian Front reached the border with Germany. The Slavic brothers have reached the German land, said the soldiers with pride. Now hold on, Hitler. During the second half of August, there were no significant changes in the front life of the regiment, except for a small movement of units by order of the division headquarters to new defensive lines in the area of Jaroslavis. With the onset of darkness on August 21st, we began to replace the units located on the line Dezeslowice, Chizhov, Pikonogi. Early in the morning of August 22nd, the reception of the new defensive line was completely finished, where the regiment was replaced by the 292nd Guards Regiment of our division. The new defensive line stretched along the front, up to 3 kilometers. The enemy, having failed at the bridgehead, was also forced to go on the defensive, but figuratively speaking, he, licking his wounds, all the time fiercely snapped back periodic artillery bombardment of the front edge of our defense. With the onset of darkness, almost every quarter of an hour hung enemy flares in the sky. Strong rifle and machine gun and mortar fire of the enemy did not make it possible to successfully conduct night searches, in which our divisional scouts participated. On August 25th, I received a combat order from the division headquarters to move at 11:00 and the offensive with the task to consolidate on the boundary Just-Chinebets, height 218.3. Counting that the enemy, after a sufficiently powerful artillery preparation, will not offer serious resistance, I built the combat order of the regiment in one echelon, and I was punished for overconfidence. Many Hitlerite firing points were unsuppressed, and the regiment's units were met with heavy rifle and machine gun and mortar fire. By the end of the day, we were able to overcome only half of the path that was determined by the combat order. The next day I narrowed the breakthrough area, took out in the second echelon of the 1st Rifle Battalion, which suffered the most casualties, and the 2nd and 3rd Battalions attached almost all the regimental artillery. Advancing on the right flank of the 2nd Battalion, attacked the enemy boldly and decisively, and soon reached the road near the village of Knoll. This was facilitated by the fact that 3 machine guns of the enemy, hindering the advance of our riflemen, were destroyed by the fire of 76 mm guns from the regimental battery. The 3rd Battalion, acting on the left flank, which was assigned the task of knocking out the Hitlerites from the height of 218.3, advanced more slowly and reached only the bend of the Stary Gyrozo road. The enemy's fire from this height was stronger than at the 2nd Rifle Battalion. In addition, something unforeseen happened. The right flank units of the neighbour, on the left the 294th Guards Rifle Regiment for some reason withdrew to the south. Taking advantage of this, Hitlerites went into a counterattack and attacked the 3rd Battalion from the flank. Major Chaika reported to me at the CP and asked for help. Mel had 2 options for decision, either to enter the battle of the 2nd echelon or my reserve, a company of machine gunners and a company of APC. Having consulted with the Chief of Staff, I chose the second option. Why? Because the 1st Battalion, judging by all appearances, would have to be used to reinforce the 3rd Battalion during the assault on height 218.3, and so it turned out. Automaticians and PTers helped the left flank of the 9th Company to repel the German counterattack, and the 7th and 8th Companies, instead of the 1st Battalion, went to the height and knocked out the enemy. On the same day, the whole regiment became aware of the heroic deed of the Partog of the 3rd Battalion, Guards Senior Lieutenant Arsenty Korobko. He repeatedly raised the soldiers in the attack, until a shell burst near him, covered him with earth, and badly concussed him, and the enemy brazenly and persistently pressed on. Partog with difficulty rose, shook off the ground, and wanted to give a command, but could not utter a word. He lost the power of speech. Then, on a piece of paper torn from a notebook, he wrote Brothers Guards. Not a step back. Prepare grenades, check rifles, machine guns. The fatherland is behind us. The Guards are not retreating. Don't be afraid of tanks. I'm here with you. Partog Korobko. The note, like a battle command, was passed from hand to hand. Guardsmen with friendly fire repulsed the enemy counterattack. On August 27th, seeking to throw us off the height of 218.3, the enemy, after a long artillery preparation, made an attack from the area of Noe, Falensin. The enemy directed the main blow against our left flank, where there were positions of the company of machine gunners of Guards Senior Lieutenant K.D. Koryako. The enemy threw 6 tanks and up to a battalion of infantry into the battle in this area. The Germans went on the offensive drunk, at full height, but the mental attack did not work out. The company commander detached a group of machine gunners consisting of Guards privates Shukin, Litvinsky, Koval, Maigon, Tikhanov, Daryev, Kolesnichenko and Yazov to strike in the flank of the advancing infantry, and himself and the rest of the men bravely took the blow. Automaticians stood to the death. 2 tanks were hit by anti-tank guns and 2 by artillerymen. I consider it my duty to emphasize the merits in these battles of our communicators. Without well-organized, uninterrupted communication would be simply impossible to quickly maneuver equipment, to use artillery in a timely manner, to carry out interaction between units. Fearlessness and selflessness were shown by soldiers of the Communications Company, Guards Junior Sergeant Volkov, Guards Privates Gelchenko, Kovtun, Shapovskoy. In the battles for the height of 218.3, they eliminated, under enemy fire, more than 50 damages of telephone communication. All these communicators were awarded with the Order of Glory of I degree. Regimental artillerymen acted above all praise. The 45 mm anti-tank gun of Guards Junior Sergeant Pajara supported the attack of our infantry with exceptionally accurate fire. During the enemy counterattack, the gun commander was wounded in the chest, but did not leave the battlefield. For this feat, brave artilleryman was awarded the Order of Patriotic War II degree. The same award was given to the commander of the 45 mm gun, Guards Sergeant Yurchenko, and the commander of the squad of the APC company, Guards Sergeant Ishchenko. The commander of the mortar platoon, Guards Lieutenant Dubinin, skillfully directed the fire of his units. In the decisive battles for the height, he moved the platoon 300 meters forward, destroyed 2 enemy machine guns, thus ensuring the advance of the infantry and the capture of the village of Deslavis. The commander of the mortar platoon, Guards Lieutenant Izmatiev, who tactically competently led his unit, destroyed 2 enemy observation posts and 3 machine gun points with mortar fire, distinguished himself there. Officers Dubinin and Izmatiev were awarded the Order of the Red Star. The same order was awarded to art technician, Guards Lieutenant Bazhenov, and platoon commander of the transport company, Guards Lieutenant Daichek. Understanding the exceptional importance of uninterrupted supply of the regiment with all kinds of ammunition, they skillfully organized round-the-clock delivery of ammunition, mines and shells to the units. The Order of the Red Star was also awarded to officers Rumiantsev, Pasinkov, Sazonov, Kislov Igorov, Zarubin, Sunduk, Guards Petty Officer Prydel, Guards Senior Sergeant Kozairev, Guards Junior Sergeants Vovnenko, Ulfaronko, Guards Privates Vizul, Krivda and others. The Order of Glory of the I degree was awarded to riflemen from the 3rd Battalion, Guards Privates Polyansky and Chernishev, who, despising death, were the first to break into the enemy trenches, killed 5 enemy soldiers by fire, and 1 was taken prisoner. This soldier's award was also presented to Guards Senior Sergeants Medvedev, Netriba, Guards Sergeants Golkin, Fedorov, Koval, Guards Junior Sergeants Kolesnikov, Kazankin, Guards Privates Molbert, Orlinik, Sklyarov, Kravets, Romasev, and others. At the end of August, the 3-year anniversary of the formation of the 97th Guards Division was celebrated. There were rallies in units and subdivisions, where heroes of long ago and recent battles spoke. In our regiment there was a meeting of veterans. It was held in a large former manor house. On the walls of the most spacious room watercolour portraits of our heroes, including a portrait of A. Jedzhiri. There is also a scheme of the combat path of the unit, diligently made by our frontline artists' designers. I congratulated the soldiers on the anniversary of the division and gave the floor to the Chief of Staff, Guards Major Takhmovtsev, who announced the orders for the division and regiment. On the combat path of the division told the Partog of the regiment, Guards Major Guy Borozenets. I listened to Grigory Ilarionovich, and in my memory recalled the battles near Rostov-on-Don and near Kharkov, near Stalingrad and the Kursk Bulge, on the Dnieper and the right bank Ukraine. Behind the curtained windows was a warm summer night, and only the muffled rumble of artillery cannonade, coming to us, reminded us of the formidable everyday life the war. In connection with the anniversary of the division, it was decided to write a greeting to the workers of the Stavropol region. In this letter, which was soon sent to the toilers of Stavropol, the guardsmen told about their successes in combat and the exploits of the most distinguished soldiers and commanders, expressed their unshakable confidence in the complete defeat of the Nazi invaders. The fall of 1944 came for us somehow imperceptibly. Maybe because the leaves of trees, dried up by the summer heat, turned yellow much earlier than usual. Or maybe it was because nature, for all of us, who had gone headlong into the front life, full of nervous and physical tension, had fallen into the background. And yet we really felt the approach of autumn weather, when cold rains began to water the earth thirsty for moisture. At the beginning of September there were strong thunderstorms, it became noticeably colder, dusty roads became unpaved. Our front life in September began the same as it ended in late August. The regiment occupied the former line of defence in the second echelon. The enemy, as it was said in official reports, was not active. There was already quite boring to all gun and machine gun and mortar firefight. As always, in a state of full alert were our scouts. In another night search I ordered to go to the capture group, led by a former Scout Guard Sergeant Riltsev, and 2 groups of cover under the command of Guards Staff Sergeant Nestorenko and Guards Sergeant Antonenko. And also, as always, the preparation for the search began with the study of the selected for reconnaissance area of enemy positions. By the flashes of gunfire, senior groups accurately determined that behind the front edge of 4 separate peasant houses was an enemy machine gun point. "We'll take a control prisoner at that machine gun," said Guards Sergeant Riltsev calmly, handing binoculars to Guards Staff Sergeant Nestorenko. "Yes," the latter agreed, looking into the distance. "You can orient yourself well here." When dusk thickened, the scouts in pairs began to move behind their commanders. Each of them had 4 grenades, a machine gun, and an army knife. When the enemy trenches were not far away, the area was illuminated by the light of a flashed rocket. Sprawled on the ground, the scouts for a minute froze in place. Nestorenko noticed that the rocket launch site is much farther away from the German trenches. Did the Krolts really leave for the night? He thought and began to listen. Not a single sound came to him. The senior sergeant crept noiselessly close to the trenches. Near them lay kettles, satchels, but there were no Germans. At the conditional signal, scouts crawled further behind the front line to the 4 houses. Nestorenko's assumption was justified. When our fighters were already 50 meters from the outermost house, again very close to the rocket soared. In its light, scouts clearly saw a machine gun standing at the fence, and away from him one after another 4 dugouts. Forward. Softly, but clearly, as soon as the rocket went out, the command was given by the commander of the capture group, Sergeant Riltsev, and immediately grenades flew into the location of the Germans. From all sides our soldiers' automatic rifles rumbled. Hitlerites responded with indiscriminate shooting. Riltsev was wounded. The commander of the cover group, Guards Senior Sergeant Nestorenko, rushed into the German trench, followed by a young scout Samsonov and others. A hand-to-hand fight ensued. Guards Private Tarasenko noticed how the German jumped out of the trench and ran towards the village. A grenade thrown after him exploded at the feet of the fugitive. Another German jumped out of a neighbouring trench. Tarasenko rushed at him and knocked his rifle out of his hands and threw him to the ground. A few minutes lasted a stubborn struggle. Finally, Tarasenko overpowered the German. "Come to me, I have the Kraut!" he shouted. Instantly from the darkness appeared scouts Boschko and Zubenko. They helped Tarasenko to tie up the fascist soldier. At this time the rest of the scouts finished with the Germans, who were in the dugouts. As suddenly as it began, the shooting was silenced, and the soldiers, taking with them the tongue, disappeared in the darkness. An hour later the prisoner testified at the regimental headquarters. And the scouts, with the exception of Riltsev, who had to be sent to the infirmary, spread out on the fragrant hay, slept a bogatier sleep. I learned about the vicissitudes of this successful night search from the commander of the reconnaissance company, who reported to me in detail about the actions of scouts. The war taught us a lot, and in particular the immutable rule that in defence at the first opportunity to improve the engineering equipment of positions. And so it was this time. But as soon as the soldiers began to work with shovels and dust rose above the trenches, the enemy immediately opened artillery and mortar fire. Several men were wounded. Then I ordered to carry out engineering works only at night. And in order to speed things up, I involved soldiers of the regiment's units and rear units. About the intensity of these works can be judged by these figures, taken by me from the combat report to the division headquarters, sent September 1st at 10:00. Only for one night were dug 300 linear meters of full-profile trenches, 620 linear meters of trenches 0.5 m deep, 8 firing positions for machine guns, equipped 2 machine gun bays. Until about 12:00 the soldiers slept, and then engaged in combat training. The theme of the training offensive reinforced rifle company and attacking the front edge of the enemy's defense by day and night, fighting in the depth of the enemy's defense, and close combat in trenches and trenches blocking small strongholds, securing the achieved lines and repulsion of enemy counterattacks offensive in the forest. According to numerous data received at that time, Hitler's troops began to accumulate ammunition with chemical warfare agents in frontline and army warehouses. It was not excluded that the fascist rulers, anticipating the inevitable collapse in the war unleashed by them, would decide to use chemical weapons against the Soviet troops standing on the threshold of Hitler's Reich. In this regard, the head of the chemical service of the regiment, Guards Captain N.I. Canin organized and conducted classes with officers and non-commissioned officers of the regiment on anti-chemical protection. Additional measures were taken to equip all personnel of the regiment with gas masks and other means of chemical protection available at that time. I visited the regimental commander's training camp, which was held by the corps commander. In addition to the corps commander and the head of the political department, before us spoke head of the operational department, Lieutenant Colonel I.F. Skorobis, Intelligence Major P.S. Vasilenko, Chief of Communications Lieutenant Colonel K.V. Podchekaev. At the division headquarters held a training camp for battalion commanders, and I held a training camp with the commanders of companies, batteries and platoons. Conducted explanatory work among the local population and prepared them for evacuation from the front line. In the evening, in the house of a Polish peasant, his fellow villagers gathered. It was crowded, but soon everyone settled down and listened with intense attention to the Russian, Soviet officer who came to them. The agitator of our regiment, Guards Captain Semiglazov, with the help of an interpreter, told the audience about the aims of the Red Army's entry into Poland, about the formation of the Polish National Liberation Committee, and about the attitude of the Soviet Union towards Poland. Martin Strojny, a peasant, read aloud in his native language the PKNO manifesto and the agreement between the Soviet government and the committee. After reading such important documents, those present nodded approvingly and began to talk animatedly. "The Russians have given us a helping hand," said Martin Strojny, "and we are grateful to the Red Army for liberating us from the fascists and caring for the future of our people. We all want to see Poland as a free, independent, democratic republic." Captain Semiglazov answered the questions of the Polish citizens thoroughly. The conversation lasted until late in the evening. The peasants left satisfied. In the area where the regiment was located, 3 commandant's offices were organized, whose duties included sending people out of the combat zone and guarding their property. In a short time, more than 200 households were liberated, and the number of evacuees amounted to about 1,500 people. On September 8th, the regiment received the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief No. 295 of September 1st, 1944, by which the 289th Guards Rifle Regiment, among other units that distinguished themselves in the battles for the capture of the Sandomir bridgehead, was awarded the honorary name of Vistula. Rallies were held in all units. Guardsmen gave their word to beat the enemy even harder in the upcoming battles. On the same day at the regular party meeting, the communists of the regiment discussed the state of party political work in the units and further tasks of the party organization. The report of the regiment's Deputy Commander for Political Affairs, Guards Major Poltorak, the speeches of Guards Captain Shildyov from the Political Department of the 97th Division, Guards Senior Lieutenants Artsab, Pavlov, Guards Privates Kapustin, Cherva and others permeated one common thought. All party political work should be aimed at ensuring the complete defeat of the hated enemy. Every communist must also be an ideological fighter. Communist soldiers, first of all, commanders and political workers, explained to their fellow soldiers the reports of the Sovinform Bureau, held talks, answered the questions of the soldiers. They also, as a rule, issued handwritten zipper leaflets, which reported on the exploits of fellow soldiers, soldiers of other parts of the division. At the meeting it was noted that the regiment noticeably increased the influx of applications from soldiers who distinguished themselves in battle, asking to be accepted into the party and komsomol. In August, 43 people were accepted as candidates for membership in the All-Union Communist Party of Bolsheviks, and 51 people were admitted to the komsomol. Battalion Commander Major Chaika, commander of the Company of Machine Gunners Guards Senior Lieutenant Koryatko, Platoon Commander Guards Lieutenant Vlasov became party members. I knew that the machine gunner Alexander Zhezharia, who died on August 13th, was posthumously presented to the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. And now in Pravda on September 15th was published the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR on awarding the Guards Sergeant A.E. Zhezharia the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. He was the first in our regiment to be awarded this high rank. Having consulted with Ivan Efimovich Poltorak, I went together with him to the units. Everywhere this news was on the lips of the soldiers, we all, both soldiers and commanders, instead of sharing one, for all great joy and great sadness at the same time. The exploits of such heroes as Zhezharia encouraged fellow soldiers, caused them to want to, not sparing their lives, even harder to beat the hated enemy. A great role in maintaining high morale of our soldiers played a very necessary in the conditions of front life activity of agitators. One of them, selflessly devoted to his work, initiative, enjoying great trust and respect among his fellow soldiers, was Guards Senior Lieutenant Arsenty Korobko. He first commanded a machine gun platoon. Then he acted as a party leader of the 3rd Battalion. To his voice listened not only communists, but all the soldiers, because Korobko bravely fought in battles, was always ahead. After the transfer of Captain Beloglazov to the political department of the division was vacant position of regimental agitator. I consulted with the deputy police officer, and we decided that there was no better candidate for this position than Korobko. We reported our opinion to the political department of the division, and this young officer became a regimental agitator. He began his work with the equipment of the agitation wagon. Covered with a tarpaulin, it in fact became a mobile red corner. Inside the wagon were wooden benches, a small table, a locker, which had newspapers Pravda, Red Star, as well as fresh issues of the front newspaper for the honor of the motherland, the army newspaper Patriot of the Motherland, and our division heroic campaign. There were also issues of the handwritten magazine Gvardia, which I have already mentioned before. By that time there were 8 issues. The wagon was also equipped with a radio receiver, which provided stable reception of Sovinform Bureau reports. On the walls between the windows hung a political map of the world and a scheme of the regiment's combat route, where all its new movements along the front routes were marked. There were also pencil portraits of the heroes of the battles. For the next issue of the handwritten magazine Gvardia, portrait sketches of distinguished fellow soldiers were made by our artist Belousov. On September 22nd, this agitation wagon first went to the location of the regiment's units. We had, if I may say so, and stationary agit posts, placed in specially adapted for this purpose dugouts. For example, at the position occupied by the 120 ME mortar battery of Guards Captain Lichtman, such a dugout was built on the initiative of the partisan of Guards Staff Sergeant Kapustin, and the soldiers called it very respectfully Front Lenin's Room. Inside this shelter really resembled a Lenin room. There were various kinds of visual agitation, a map with the front line, newspapers, magazines, brochures. There were political talks, loud readings of newspapers, and in the evenings, when there was a rare lull in the front life, there was a collective learning of songs to the accordion. The divisional newspaper wrote about the experience of this agit post, calling to pick up the initiative of the mortarmen. In September, Sovinform Bureau, almost every day, reported about new victories of the Red Army. Romanians and Bulgarians, Czechs and Slovaks, Hungarians and Yugoslavs joyfully met the Soviet soldiers' liberators. The Baltic states were liberated. All this caused a burst of enthusiasm among the soldiers of the regiment, and your full-time and freelance agitators barely had time to comment on these momentous events. In late September, heavy rains began to fall, and all engineering work in the regiment slowed down. By this time, the combat training program outlined in the plan and schedule had been fully completed, followed by several days of battalion tactical exercises using regimental artillery. On September 27th, a combat order was received from division headquarters to move the regiment to a new defence area. At 20:00, the regiment moved along the route Glendo, Stazo, Podmaliniec, Prozymi, and by 24:00 concentrated on the edge of the forest northeast of Prozymi. On the next day, a reconnaissance of the terrain was carried out, and the regiment's units advanced to the front line with the onset of darkness. The proximity of the front line was felt quite real from the enemy's side now, and then slammed single shots from rifles, occasionally fractionally murmured short machine gun bursts. All night, until morning, the Germans periodically illuminated the front line with rockets. In this uneasy, but already quite familiar front situation, and there was a change of parts, 34th Guards Rifle Regiment of the 13th Guards Division gave us its defensive area in the area of Kasetalan, Vigoda, Yasen. We spent almost a month in the trenches, stood in defence for a long time, and naturally we were eager to take part in the real business, meaning offensive combat operations. On one of such days, and went around the trenches of the front line. I often stopped and talked to the soldiers. One of them introduced himself. Private Kapushak asked, "Will we be advancing soon, Comrade Lieutenant Colonel?" "Soon," I answered, and, seeing that the soldier is quite young and probably not shot, added, "And in the meantime you should learn to fight, Kapushak. After all, only a skillful fighter wins." The company commander confirmed that Vasily Kapushak had arrived to the regiment recently, after the liberation of the Stanislav region, where he lived in a village. "His sister Katria was tortured by the fascists," said the company commander, "and the soldier is eager to fight to avenge them." A week passed, maybe even more, and here in the combat report of the commander to the regimental headquarters, I meet Kapushak's name. On the attempt of Germans to attack our positions, the soldiers of the battalion answered such a swift blow that Hitlerites, retreating, had to wade across a small river. Vasily Kapushak showed skill and tactical cunning. Ahead of the retreating, he, together with soldiers of the machine gun crew of Guards, Privates Poshtinyuk and Grinko, quickly crossed to the other bank. And as soon as the Hitlerites came out of the water and climbed the hill behind the hillside, Kapushak from ambush hit them with a machine gun burst. The soldier saw how the first Germans killed by him fell down, and in his heart he rejoiced his sacred revenge on the enemy was accomplished. Then the second group of Hitlerites appeared. Quickly changing the position, the machine gunner again opened and aimed fire. The fascists came to their senses and began to fire from mortars at the machine gunner's position. Kostya Poshtanyuk, a fellow countryman and friend of Kapushak, was wounded by a mine fragment. Soon Taras Grinko was killed. It was the first death, the first loss of a battle friend that happened before Vasily's eyes. At first he was even confused and helplessly said, "How can it be, guys? How can it be?" But the momentary confusion was replaced by a rush of indomitable anger. Kapushak clenched the handles of the machine gun and did not stop firing until the surviving fascists began to withdraw indiscriminately. Combat presented Kapushak for the first combat feat to the Order of Glory. I agree. I supported this presentation, and soon the first award appeared on the young machine gunner's uniform. On September 29th, was summoned to the division headquarters by the commander of the regimental reconnaissance platoon, Guards Petty Officer L. Vinogradov. I personally knew the reason for this summons, but whether or not Alexander guessed why he was summoned, I did not know. In any case, he kept calm, was as taut as always, except that in his brown eyes shone cheerful sparks. I guessed probably. On this day, the division commander, Major General Major I. Antseferov first presented him with the epaulettes of a junior lieutenant, and then the Order of Glory, First Class, and congratulated the first in the division full cavalier of this honourable soldier's order. He was also handed a letter of greeting from the division command, which included the following words to you, the first full holder of the Order of Glory of our division, courageous and fearless hero of our beloved motherland. The division command sends warm, heartfelt, combat greetings and shakes your bogatia hand. We are confident that you will educate dozens of courageous and experienced scouts, pass on to them your wealth of experience, and by your heroism, courage and bravery will glorify in battles our battle guards' banners. Vinogradov remained a guest of the division commander for several days. The experience of engineering works accumulated by our soldiers was very useful at the new frontier. The state of the defences could not satisfy us. The trenches of the first line had insufficient depth. There were no dugouts for accommodation of personnel. But when we had to take up the task of putting things in proper order, we realised what was going on. Under a thin layer of soil on the defence site were solid stones and rubble, and again in the night time our fighters were literally digging into the ground. So for us October 1944 began. There are their own strict laws of war for those who are on the front line. One of them is to know as much as possible about the enemy, to be always on the alert, not to let the enemy catch you off guard. Intelligence issues I had to deal with constantly. And this time a reconnaissance group was very carefully compiled, which was ordered to be headed by Guards Staff Sergeant Popenko. Cover groups were led by Guards Staff Sergeant Bezmenov and Guards Private Pochinko. The participants of the night search and capture of the control prisoner for 3 days conducted an intensified visual study of the enemy's leading edge. By the end of the 3rd day, the observation log and the schemes drawn up by them gave an almost exhaustive picture of the German defences in the area planned for reconnaissance. The object of attack was an enemy bunker with a machine gun, located near a ravine north of Korytnas. From our side to this bunker there was a scouring hole, and near it there was an unmown field of clover, which had already wilted on the route. On the night of October 5th, the scouts came out of the trench and cautiously moved forward, stretching out on the ground, when from the side of the Germans with a quiet crackling and hissing flares soared into the dark sky. And it had to happen that just half an hour before the scouts went out in the night search, Alexander Vinogradov returned from the division headquarters. He came to the regiment's CP and reported on his arrival. I heartily congratulated him on the Order of Glory, First Class, and on his first officer rank. He told me that General Antsiferov talked to him several times on the veranda of the former manor house, where the division headquarters was located. Udmurt by nationality, a native of the village of Gondareva, Alanshinsky district of the Udmurt ASSR, Alexander took a liking not only to his scouts, but also to all officers of the regiment. And in the battalions he was well known how many times he went from the front line to the enemy camp. I also liked this 20-year-old guy very much. Blonde, with brown eyes, with dimpled cheeks, cheerful and friendly, strong physically, with a boiling nature that demanded action. "And your boys," I said to him, "have just gone to visit the Croats." Popenko led them to the tongue. "Let me go to the front line. Comrade Guards Lieutenant Colonel, I'll wait for them there." "Go, Sasha, go," they went from the section of the 1st Company. Vinogradov said, as it should be, yes, turned around and left the dugout. I couldn't assume that I was seeing him for the last time. For 4 hours the platoon commander waited for the return of the divorcees, and they had not heard a word from them. Vinogradov's patience ran out, and he, handing over his documents to the company commander, as if justifying himself, excitedly said, "I cannot without the guys, understand." He jumped out of the trench, and soon his figure melted in the darkness. He quite quickly found his scouts, who gladly met him. All this time, it turned out, they had been lying in front of the enemy trenches, as they seemed to have been spotted by the Germans. The guardsmen did not know that the enemy had a change of jaws that night. It was necessary to wait until the Hitlerites would settle down, and the time was passing, the dawn was approaching. Vinogradov feared that the fascists could notice the passages through the minefield and wire fence made by our soldiers. Then he made a desperately bold decision to capture the tongue right in the trench. 2 men crawled with him, the rest stayed in place for fire support if necessary. Just at that time 2 flares flew into the sky one after the other. What the experienced scout had feared had happened. The Germans noticed the breach of their barriers and, having signalled for help by the 3rd rocket, threw grenades at random at these places. A fierce battle ensued. Enemy machine guns flanking fire closed the escape route to Popenko's group. Vinogradov ordered both men to immediately withdraw to the main group. Those quickly crawled back, and he himself, having prepared grenades, did not hurry to crawl after them. Suddenly there was a sharp shout. The platoon commander recognized Popenko's voice. Apparently he was wounded. Vinogradov realized that he was in trouble. Enemy grenades were exploding where the scouts were. And then he whistled loudly, long. The scouts realized the platoon commander was ordering everyone to withdraw. He himself, distracting the Germans on himself, opened fire on them with a machine gun and threw grenades. The scouts, continuously shooting back, began to retreat to their own, carrying with them a severely wounded senior sergeant. "Where is Vinogradov?" he asked hoarsely. "Where is Sasha?" Someone from the fighters answered. "Retreating, probably. We heard him give the signal." The soldiers barely escaped from under fire, and suddenly everyone realized. In the place where they had just left, the fight broke out with renewed vigor. "There's our platoon leader. It's Vinogradov." And without thinking, the scouts, led by Guards Petty Officer Siroshtan, except for those who were carrying Popenko, turned back. All were pierced by one thought: to rescue the commander by all means. But they didn't crawl halfway. As enemy mines burst in front of them, bullets whistled. The soldiers lay down, waiting for a convenient moment to move forward again, but suddenly everything went quiet on the enemy's side. Foreseeing bad things, the heart of the scouts clenched with pain, but there was still hope. Maybe Vinogradov sneaked to his men in another place. It was beginning to get light. The sky overhead was becoming ash-grey. It was necessary to return, and the soldiers, frowning and annoyed, silently crawled to their front line. Vinogradov did not return. When I was reported to me about all this, I ordered to thoroughly investigate the neutral strip, but it did not yield any results. Then I called the commander of the 1st Rifle Company, which occupied positions in the area of the night search, and ordered him with the onset of darkness to conduct a reconnaissance by combat and capture the tongue. Maybe this will help to clarify the circumstances of the disappearance of Guards Junior Lieutenant Vinogradov. The task of the 1st Company performed at such a rapid pace that it immediately ensured success. Several prisoners were taken, including a puny field officer who was brought to the regiment's CP. The interpreter questioned him. "Your officer was wounded in the legs and could not move." The prisoner began his story. "He killed 24 of our soldiers, but did not give himself alive, blew himself up with the last grenade. He had no documents. He was buried under the forest, near a big oak tree, separately from our soldiers, in a separate grave. Our battalion commander, Mr. Major, said you, the soldiers of the Great Reich, need in the name of the Führer to learn to fight from this Russian. At the cost of his life, he saved his soldiers. This is our enemy, but for his bravery, he deserves to be honored." The field furball spoke the truth. The other prisoners confirmed his words. They repeated with a kind of dumb amazement that there was indeed a funeral for a Russian hero. Yes, our Sasha Vinogradov deserved that even the enemies admired his feat. It was finally possible to check all this in a week, when our battalions threw back the enemy a few kilometers to the west. On the grave of Guards Junior Lieutenant Vinogradov there was a simple wooden cross, unknown to whom it was placed. The remains of the hero were transferred to the nearest Polish village. It was hard to believe that the famous scout, whose portrait was printed in the newspaper Pravda just a month ago, was no longer among us. The immortal feat of Komsomol member Alexander Vinogradov remained forever in the memory of his fellow soldiers as an example of fearlessness, courage, unwavering devotion to the motherland. By the middle of October 1944, it became clear that Hitler's command, because of heavy losses in tanks and manpower, gave up attempts to repel from the Soviet troops the bridgehead on the Vistula. The number of attacks on our positions was sharply reduced. Our 289th Guards Regiment still held the defence in the area of Polish villages Korytnis, Praziima. Daily combat training sessions were held. Particular attention was paid to the interaction of all units in offensive battles, storming heavily fortified enemy positions, forcing water barriers, actions in a tank landing, the offensive at night. On October 12th, the political department and headquarters of the 32nd Guards Corps held a meeting of soldiers who distinguished themselves in combat. I, Bezdaruzhny, Guards Senior Sergeant, represented our regiment with dignity at this meeting. On October 14th in the regiment, became known about the response welcome letter to the soldiers of the 97th Guards Division of our fellow countrymen toilers of the Stavropol territory. It was published by the divisional newspaper Heroic Campaign. And 2 days later I was awarded the Order of Suvorov I degree for the battles on the Sandomir bridgehead. I must confess that when I received the order to come to the division headquarters to receive the award, I certainly did not expect that I would be awarded this most honourable award for an officer. After all, as a rule, it was awarded to commanders of a higher rank than the regimental commander. I frankly told General Ant Syfarov about it, taking from his hands a red box with the order. "You deserve it, then," smiled Ivan Ivanovich. "I'm glad for you, Yuri Andreevich." I returned to the regiment in high spirits. I was warmly congratulated by Poltorak, Takhmovtsev, Borozenets, Korobko, Kovalenko and my other comrades in arms, and the regiment commissar, Guards Senior Lieutenant Gorin, reminded me. "Have you not forgotten, Comrade Guards Lieutenant Colonel, that tomorrow is the regimental Komsomol meeting?" "I haven't forgotten," I replied, and prepared for the report. The agenda of this meeting was not quite ordinary, the battle banner, the sanctity of the regiment. It was suggested to us by the Komsorg at the meeting of the Komsomol Committee, and we agreed with him. The meeting was timed to the 3rd anniversary of the combat baptism of the regiment, and Gorin asked me to make a report. "You are not just the commander of the regiment, but also its veteran, serving in the unit from the day of its foundation," he said convincingly. In my personal archive, I have a copy of the minutes of this meeting, held on October 17th, 1944. By that time there were 146 Komsomol members in the regiment, 83 soldiers, 58 sergeants and 5 officers. Of these, 110 had already been awarded orders and medals. The meeting was attended by 86 Komsomol members. The rest were on the front line. It was impossible to expose our defence. The front is the front. I began my report with the story about how the regiment received the baptism of fire on October 17th, 1941, on the highway Taganrog-Rostov, near the station Sinyavka, how the regiment was awarded the battle banner on November 7th, 1942, near Stalingrad, and the Guards banner, before the Battle of Kursk. He named the names of the heroes, Komsomol members who distinguished themselves in the battles of the 3 years of the war, called on young soldiers to be equal to them. He suggested a minute of silence to honour the memory of the Komsomol members who fell in the battles for the motherland. Here I am writing these lines, and as now I see young guys standing with uncovered heads, who were just more lucky by that time, but whose lives were not insured either, though then the end of the war was already visible, the borders of Germany were within reach. I spoke for 20 minutes, and it seemed to me that the report lasted an hour. It is not easy to rake up the front-line past. 8 people spoke at the meeting: the commander of the rifle platoon, Guards Lieutenant F. Shvoika, commander of the mortar crew, Guards Staff Sergeant V. Afanasiev, Knight of the Order of Glory I degree, Pomkomv platoon, Guards Petty Officer I. Golkin, awarded the Order of Glory I degree. Golkin, who was awarded the Order of Glory I degree and the Medal for Bravery for the exploits committed at the Sandomir bridgehead, young Komsomol members D. Parashenko and T. Sirkin, who had not yet participated in the battles. The floor was given to the veterans of the regiment, the Partorg, Guards Captain G. Borozentsu and Pomnik Stab Guards Senior Lieutenant P. Kovalenko. The Komsomol members listened with special interest to the head of the artillery workshop of the Guards, Senior Technician Lieutenant B. Boltyanovsky, a member of the Bolshevik Party since 1919, a participant of the Civil War, who was old enough to be a father to the young soldiers. Here was the decision of the meeting. 1. The Komsomol members of the regiment, filled with boundless love for the motherland and burning indomitable hatred for fascist scoundrels, will continue to fight heroically under the glorious Battle Guards banner against the sworn enemy, not sparing strength, the blood and life itself to achieve complete victory. 2. Komsomol members assure the command that in the forthcoming decisive battles they will do their best to glorify the Guards' banner, to carry it honourably through all the battles. We will educate the non-union youth of the regiment, mobilise them for heroic feats, for exemplary performance of the orders of the command. The meeting lasted 1 hour and 15 minutes. Then there was a big concert of regimental amateur art. At the end of October, the regiment held battalion tactical exercises with the participation of tanks, for which there was an 18th-kilometre march from Przima to Konemlety and back. This completed the October combat training programme. We were replenished with new recruits and soldiers and sergeants returning from hospitals. In rifle companies there were 75 to 80 men. We formed battalions of 3 companies. Almost fully staffed artillery, mortar, sapper units, communications company. Regimental artillery switched to mechanized traction. Horses were now only in the rear units. Increased the number of vehicles in the regiment, including trophy vehicles. I, as regimental commander, received a staff car with a radio station. In October, at different times we were visited by members of the Military Council of the 5th Guards Army, Major Generals Akhevulin and P. E. Sukharev, head of the political department of the army, Major General Major F. A. Katkov. They talked with officers, sergeants, soldiers, checked the state of party political work, and, it must be said, were satisfied with the situation in the regiment, which was announced to me, deputy politician and chief of staff. November began with the fact that all our personnel changed their summer uniforms for winter ones, which we were provided with completely and very conveniently. The cold weather began. At night we felt a light frost, and during the day the temperature was close to 0. We celebrated the 27th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution in conditions of relative frontal calm. On the eve of the holiday, the album of our regiment's heroes was finalized. With great inspiration, love and diligence, taking minutes out of his free time, it was done by Guards Staff Sergeant G. Skiba. But we were also seriously engaged in urgent matters, which were dictated by the situation. The division command immediately after the holidays held in Przima staff divisional exercises, in which all regimental commanders with their staffs participated. The weather was inclement almost the whole of November, with frequent cold rains and wet snow. This added a lot of trouble to our already difficult front life. We had to fight against water accumulating in the trenches. At the end of November, the regiment resumed night searches for scouts. On November 24th, in the area northwest of Yablanis, on a dark, cold night, the machine gunners of Guards Lieutenant Potelov's company went on a combat mission. During the day before, they carefully studied the ways of approach and departure, clarified the night landmarks, and therefore confidently advanced to the intended object of attack. They returned with a German machine gunner. When he was taken to the regimental headquarters, he complained about the unfortunate fate. Tomorrow I had to go on vacation to Munich, and here. Indeed, a vacation ticket was found in the pocket of the prisoner during the search. Guards Staff Sergeant Koval, who delivered the German to the headquarters, laughed and said, "It can't be helped. Our service is like that, we take prisoners without checking documents." I don't remember whether or not this remark was translated to the German, but he was really not laughing. He turned out to be an Ober-Effreient of the 5th Company, 2nd Battalion, 188th Infantry Regiment, 68th Infantry Division. His testimony confirmed that the 20th Motorized Division, which was earlier in front of the defence area of our regiment, was replaced by the 68th Infantry Division on November 4th. Participants of the night search Guards Sergeants Cherny, Bolotov, Daryev, Guards Junior Sergeant Pushkary, Guards Privates Chernyshev, Kolesnikov, Matroy, Turbin and others were awarded the Order of Glory, II degree. November 26th, held a meeting of party activists of the regiment. Communists had a businesslike and principled conversation about our readiness to solve new, even more difficult tasks in connection with the preparation for fighting in Nazi Germany. The beginning of December did not bring any significant changes in the front situation. But our life was not monotonous. It was often filled with events that are difficult to forget and remain in memory for a long time. To them belongs, for example, what happened in the location of the regiment in early December 1944. We had gotten used to the fact that recently we had quite often been visited by a mobile radio installation of the political department of the 97th Guards Division, which broadcasted both for us and for Hitler's troops. Usually they started with Russian, Ukrainian folk and popular Soviet songs. It may seem that there is no way to connect such a thing, an alarming combat situation and beautiful, soul-stirring music. But such programs I can judge by myself, as if pushed back the hardships of front life, caused a rush of good, light feelings in the soldiers, lifted their spirits. Thoughts flew to their native home, to their loved ones infinitely dear. Certainly not always Hitlerites gave us to listen to the concert, and the intimate song was sometimes drowned out by explosions of mines and shells, machine gun bursts. On December 3rd, when it got dark, another radio program began. The covered vehicle, as always, stood in a small ravine deep in our positions, and the wires to the powerful loudspeakers were brought to the neutral strip 80 meters away. Our announcers first read to the guards regular reports of the Sovinform Bureau. After that, the transmission for the enemy side began. Throughout the front line loudly sounded in German calls to the enemy soldiers, so that they did not believe the false propaganda of Goebbels, that seriously think about the abyss into which Hitler is pushing them. Then recordings of German songs, dance music, Strauss waltzes were transmitted. Only after a few minutes, as if having come to their senses, Hitlerites sent some mines and machine gun bursts in the direction from where our radio transmissions were conducted. Half an hour later, the unusual night concert resumed, only now the transmission was conducted from the enemy trenches. By the hissing in the German loudspeakers, we could easily guess that they were playing old, worn-out records. The songs about Stenka Razin, the old tunes of Barinia, on the river sounded hoarsely. Even Katyusha was not forgotten by the fascists to modernize their lean musical repertoire. Then something bellowed, a harsh coughing sounded, a squeaky voice of some, as it was explained to us in broken Russian, defector was heard. He confusedly and incoherently appealed to fellow countrymen to go over to the side of Germany, for there, they said, they had already prepared such an all-powerful weapon that the Bolsheviks would not be able to resist. Maybe the fascist radio wanted to broadcast something else, but at that time the mortars of Captain Lickman's and Senior Lieutenant Artsab's units struck loudly. Such a signal was enough for rifle shots to slam and machine guns to rattle. And in a few minutes the Hitlerites' field radio was silent. Goebbels choked quickly. Laughed the guardsman. But it was not the end of the matter. Ivan Efimovich Poltorak asked me for permission to conduct a small night operation. It turned out that the regimental agitator guard, Senior Lieutenant Korobko, decided to attach on the wall of the house, which stood on the neutral strip 100 meters from our trenches and about the same distance from the German front line, a cartoon portrait of Hitler made by regimental amateur artists on a large square piece of parachute silk. The scouts will quickly hang it, Yuri Andreevich convinced me, deputy. I've already talked to the scout platoon commander, and that the Germans did not immediately remove it, the approaches to the house from their side mined. We'll send a squad of sappers. It's a good idea, I say to Ivan Efimovich, only how not to kill people. Now the Krolts are asleep after the concert, our guys will slip through. All right, I agreed. Only let the volunteers go. And so 4 scouts and 3 sappers slipped into the night darkness, and while the scouts attached to the wall of the house, facing the German trenches, the image of the Führer, sappers led by Guards Sergeant Sanfirov, mined the approaches to it. Hitler was depicted with plasters on his forehead and cheek, with a bandaged leg, on crutches, with an outstretched arm, as if begging German soldiers to fight without sparing their lives. At the bottom it was written in large German Fluter, Hitler, lay down. On a clear December day, the drawing on the wall was clearly visible to the Hitlerites. But what could they do? Shoot at the image of their Führer? They couldn't. Tear down the canvas in the daytime? It's risky, you'll get under fire. And only at night the Nazis tried to get to the wall. But in vain, some of them were blown up by mines. This peculiar satirical agitprop poster blistered the eyes of enemy soldiers and officers for almost a week. Finally, Hitlerites could not stand it and opened artillery fire on the house, destroying it, wasting a lot of shells not for the direct purpose. But even with benefit for us, our observers accurately detected the firing positions of 2 enemy batteries. One of the best sappers of the regiment, the commander of the sapper section, Guards Sergeant Petr Pavlovich Samfirov, played an important role in this propaganda and combat, if I may say so, episode. This former warrior, modest, even shy man had enviable composure. He was born in 1904 in the village of Napolnaya, in Ryazan, China. Being a very young boy, he participated in the Civil War, served in the music team and sanitary detachment. In the fall of 1941, Samfirov went to the front, fought first near Leningrad, then at the Kursk Bulge was a machine gunner, graduated from the School of Junior Commanders, and headed a rifle squad. In April 1943, after hospitalization, Peter Pavlovich was sent to another unit. At that time, the general, the division commander, came to the regiment. He lined up everyone and asked, "Who of you wants to become a sapper?" I thought Samfirov told me later, if the general himself has such a need, then the front needs sappers, and even very much, and made a step forward. I learned quite quickly, and became not just a sapper, but a sapper intelligence. This business was to my heart. Earlier it was already said that Peter Pavlovich, for his military exploits, was awarded the Order of Glory I degrees, and he became a full cavalier of this order in December 1944. The case was like this. The very next night, after the installation of Hitler's portrait on the wall of the house, a group of scouts went on a night search. The passage for them in the minefield of the enemy made Samfirov. That night he neutralized 24 German mines. The reconnaissance group quickly reached the front edge of the enemy, having thrown grenades at the enemy dugout, took the tongue, but when leaving the scouts were detected. Hitlerites opened fire on them. Unfortunately, it was not without losses. Young scouts guards Pavel Pavakov, Lupota, and the commander of the squad guards Sergeant Karpatenko were killed. The captured German was also wounded. Our scouts dragged him on themselves, but he died on the neutral strip. Documents and weapons of the Hitlerite were delivered to the division headquarters. Here, for this night search, I presented Guard Sergeant Samfirov to rewarding with the Order of Glory of the I degree. The Order of the Red Star was posthumously awarded to Guard Sergeant Karpatenko. While signing the award list for him, I remembered that his father, who fought in a neighbouring regiment with us and received permission to meet with his son, was to visit him. My heart ached at the thought that this meeting would not take place. But it still happened. The road to Rytviany went through the forest. Mighty oaks and tall pines crowded along the roadsides. When the forest ended and the village appeared in the distance, a tired soldier with a greying moustache, dressed in a worn-out overcoat, with an automatic rifle and a duffel bag over his shoulders, stopped for a break. According to his calculations, this was the very village where his son, also a machine gunner, was stationed. In its centre, in a small square, in a tight ring, stood warriors with uncovered heads. The experienced fighter realized someone was being buried. This was not uncommon at the front. There was nothing to be done. He came closer and saw there were 3 coffins near the dug grave. He took off his hat and stopped. And when he heard Karpatenko's surname in the farewell word, which was spoken by the company commander, he shook. The old soldier understood everything, stepped forward and fell down beside the coffin. So old Mitra had time to say goodbye to his dearly beloved Mitenka. For a long time he stood silently in a kind of stupor. Already the threefold salute had sounded, already a mound of earth had grown over the common grave. Someone put a pyramid with a tin star on top, hastily built of narrow boards, and he stood there without noticing anyone, and only inhaled deeply with makarokny smoke. All this heavy scene was taking place before my eyes, and I could hardly hold back my tears. Then I came to Senior Karpatenko, shook his hand, expressed my condolences. But is there anything to comfort my father? The scouts from the department, which was commanded by his son, silently escorted the veteran outside the village. They stood on the road until a stocky, slouching figure in a worn-out overcoat disappeared around the corner. By order of the commander, the regiment in a few days withdrew to the second echelon and settled down in the area of Krzywolinch, Oglendo, Zemblis, Selek. I ordered my CP and regimental headquarters to be located in Selek. Combat training was resumed in the units. But one more event of that time was surely preserved in the memory of my fellow soldiers. Exactly 3 months after we buried with honours hero of the Soviet Union A.E. Jezheria on December 13th, near his grave in Konumlati, on a small square in front of the church, a solemn and mourning rally was held. Together with the guardsmen of the regiment, the Polish army soldiers and local residents took part in it. Correspondents of Krasnaya Zvezda, front and army newspapers came to Konumlati. Before the beginning of the rally, the photo correspondent of our army newspaper G. Omolchuk took a symbolic picture. Russian and Polish soldiers with raised automatic rifles swear over the grave of the hero of the Soviet Union A.E. Jezheria to avenge the damned fascists for his death. At the rally spoke Guards Major Poltorak, as well as Guards Staff Sergeant Skiba, Guards Sergeant Popov and Guards Private Bugoria, who fought together with Jezheria. Everyone talked about the glorious feats of Alexander Yefimovich, about the bright memory that lives about him in the hearts of his fellow soldiers. Then Guards Major Poltorak read out the regimental order, which stated that the regiment's machine gun No. 0184, the commander of which was a brave machine gunner, was given the name the Machine Gun Regiment, named after hero of the Soviet Union A. Jezheria. On behalf of the local peasants spoke a short, gaunt Stanislav Mason. He assured the Guards that the Poles would teach the children by the example of the exploits of their liberators, soldiers of the Red Army, that they would take care of the hero's grave as the most precious shrine. On behalf of the Polish army, said at the rally Zygmunt Milewski, I salute the hero of the Soviet Union Alexander Jezheria, who fell in the fight against the German invaders. The Polish people will never forget the help of the Red Army soldiers, their selfless heroism. Poles will not forget the brave son of Russia. On December 18th, in the area of Patsoniwo, 5 kilometers from Selek, there was a tactical exercise with live firing on the theme offensive and breakthrough of reinforced rifle battalion position defense of the enemy. From the composition of our regiment in this exercise participated in the 2nd Rifle Battalion, a battery of 120 mm mortars, batteries of 45 mm and 76 mm's. Present was the commander of the 32nd Guards Corps, Lieutenant General A.I. Rodimtsev. After the unit accomplished the task, he praised the actions of the soldiers and announced his gratitude to all the personnel who participated in the exercise. In late December, the regiment again took the defence site in the first echelon. In essence, we had to return to the former place. On New Year's Eve, I managed to meet with my older brother Nikolai. And it happened like this. From the letters that he sent me, it was possible to establish that the brother is not so far away, in an artillery regiment, in one of the neighbouring divisions to ours. I called General Antsiferov, told him about it, and asked for permission to go to the unit where Nikolai served. Comrade General, I have 2 other brothers fighting, but I don't know where they are and whether they are alive. And here's such an opportunity. I'll be back in a day. I'll give you 24 hours, Ivan Ivanovich said into the receiver. I'm glad for you. The conversation took place in the morning, and in the afternoon I hugged Kolya Staff Sergeant Naumenko. For those almost 5 years that we had not met, he had changed a lot, and I had never seen him in a military uniform. There were 4 brothers in the family. Nikolai, the eldest, when his father died in 1932, was already 27 years old, and he, in fact, replaced all of us, the youngest, father. However, the other brothers, Alexander and Sergei, were a little younger than Nikolai, one by a year, the other by 3. The commander of the artillery regiment, a young lieutenant colonel like me, went to meet me, and to my request to let Nikolai visit me for a day or 2, answered smiling. Nikolai Andreevich fights well, so in the form of encouragement I give him leave for 3 days. My older brother stayed with me, and then returned to his unit. As usual, we remembered our native places, our mother, and we blamed ourselves for the fact that we didn't write letters to her often. We did not know then, as she did, that Alexander died in 1941, and there was no news from Sergei either. And only after the war we learned that he did not live just a month before the victory he died in battle on the outskirts of Berlin. During the meeting with my brother, I remembered my life. Our family, when I was born, lived in Romney, and in 1921 moved to the village of Loknia, 25 kilometers from this town. There was a 7-year school there, and I finished it in 1934. I decided to enter Romnia Technical School of Mechanization of Agriculture. I studied for 2 years, and something appealed to me there. In short, agrarian, from me did not come out, and I went to the city of Voroshilovsky to my older brother Nicholas, who lived there with his family and worked at the metallurgical plant. He got me a job as a technician normalizer. After a year, I got bored with this job too. And no matter how much Nikolai shamed me, I took a settlement at the plant and went to Kerch. I didn't know why. I got a job as a loader at the port, a few months breathed the sea, then went to the state farm Bajarovo again, it seems to be on the village pooled. I worked first as a bookkeeper, then I was elected the chairman of the Workers' Committee. Here from this position and was drafted in early December 1939 in the army. And I went far away from the warm southern sea to the cold sea, to the cold sea, to the garrison near Arkhangelsk. I started my service in the ski battalion of the 33rd Reserve Rifle Regiment. We were preparing to fight with the Finns. But we didn't have to. Almost all recruits were sent to Zhytomyr Infantry Military School. And the new 1940 year we met in Kiev, and on January 1st we were already in Zhytomyr. A year and 4 months later our battalion was transferred to Rostov Infantry School, and there in Perzhanovsky camps, near Novocherkassk, and I pinned on my buttonholes on July 15th, 1941, 2 Kubaras. But I have already mentioned it before. I did not think then, at the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, that I would become a cadre military man, that the officer's profession for life. And so it turned out I was in the ranks of the Soviet armed forces for half a century, and I am proud of it. By the end of 1944, the 5th Guards Army created a deeply echeloned defence at the Sandomir bridgehead. The total length of the defensive lines along the front was over 50 kilometers. All formations, units and subdivisions of the army, including our regiment, firmly and reliably entrenched in their positions. It was clear to us, commanders, that the intensified combat training of troops was carried out in order to solve the strategic task, a major offensive, which was to be carried out in 1945. On the night of New Year's Eve, exactly at 24:00 Moscow time, the front rang with battle salutes. Guns, mortars, tracer bullets from machine guns, rifles and automatic rifles flew in the direction of enemy positions, and officers were shooting from pistols. All of us, participants of the Great Patriotic War, deeply believed that the hour of victory was not far away, but we still had to fight and fight for it.